Hello everyone, this is Joseph Holbrook again, your weekly conversation partner about social theory for religious studies. And today I have a really good one for you. It requires a lot of concentration in reading it, but it's a great example of a literature review. It was written in 2001, Ronald Formisano, and he does a very comprehensive literature review of the concept of political culture in two disciplines. If you ever take LAS 6003, this is important. This will help you out. So he first goes through the first half of the paper, analyzing, or actually giving a sort of a historical overview of the use of political culture and the various people that published on it, the disagreements, the criticisms, the definitions in the field of political science from about 1950s up through 2000. Then about halfway through his paper, he goes back to the 1950s, and I missed it the first time I read it. And you go back, and he doesn't have a subhead. He just transitions to talking about the use of the term political culture in the history field, in the discipline of history. And so there he goes back to the 1950s, to the very early uses of the concept, and starts over and does another review of it up through 2000. So it's an interdisciplinary literature review. If you ever are called upon to produce one, this will give you a great example of how to go about it. So now I'm going to share my screen with you. I hope my dog doesn't come out here and start barking. It's actually not my dog. I'm going to go here, and now here. Okay. So, Arnold P. Formisano, the Journal of Interdisciplinary History. So you see why he did it in an interdisciplinary fashion, because that's probably what the journal was looking for. They wanted to see how the concept developed in two different disciplines, history and political science. So, today we're taking a deeper dive into the idea of political culture. So, I've already mentioned that this article is more like a lit review than a review essay. A review essay might spend 2 or 3 pages on one book, so you can only review 4, 5, 6 books. The review essay, this lit review may spend a sentence or two on one author, a paragraph on another one, but it's a kind of a rapid overview of a lot of different writings on the subject. So instead of having 4 to 6 sources, you might examine 30 sources in a lit review. So Formisano criticizes most definitions as too vague or ambiguous to be useful, but it does not actually present his own definition. Remember, this is a review. He worries that political culture might become a residual category that is used to explain whatever else is left over and unexplained. And what you're going to see, one of the big problems with the concept of political culture is how hard it is to measure or precisely define. He traces the origins of the idea of political culture back to Gabriel Almond in the 1950s, and then goes through a review of the uses of political culture and the criticisms of it through the late 1990s. So political culture is kind of an umbrella concept that's used to explain a lot of other political phenomena. Imagine it this way. Suppose you compare Sweden and Paraguay, or Bolivia, or Norway. But let's go with Sweden and Paraguay. Would you guess that there's a different culture in Sweden and in Paraguay? And secondly, would you guess that there would be a different set of political attitudes or political inclinations in their residents? That gives you an immediate intuitive feel for what it's talking about with political culture. Political culture is an idea of a specific subset of culture that orients its inhabitants or residents towards a particular political point of view. There could be an authoritarian political culture, there could be an individualist political culture, there could be conservative political culture, but how do you define it precisely and measure it? Gregory Ullman says every political system is embedded in a particular pattern of orientations to political action. He referred to this pattern as a political culture. He also suggested that the popular term ideology, which is a cousin to political culture or a cousin to worldview, be confined to the systematic and explicit formulation of a general orientation to politics, leaving political culture to encompass the vaguer and more implicit orientations, kind of like worldview. So ideology is systematic and explicit. Political culture is vaguer, broader, and more implicit. So he initially rejected terms such as attitudes to politics, political values, national character, cultural ethos as intrinsic to political culture. He deemed them unstable and overlapping, and ironically, references to attitudes, values, and the like became the standard elements of later definitions, and remain so. In 1963, Ullman teamed up with Sidney Verba, and they published The Civic Culture, which is a classic of political science literature. It's a cross-national study offering a theory of political stability and democracy that implicitly celebrated Anglo-American representative government. In other words, Great Britain and the United States particularly would be like the gold standard against which other political cultures would be measured. The civic culture had appeared when confidence in American leaders and institutions was riding high. The criticism of the civic culture theory of democracy is that it elevated Anglo-American political culture to inspirational models. In other words, it was criticized for being ethnocentric. Ethnocentric. This reaction to Western ethnocentrism often fused with a simultaneous rejection of the theory of modernization, sometimes known as development theory, the popularity of which was also declined precipitously in this period, giving way later on to dependency theory, which originated in South America. In 1964, Young Kim wrote that political culture was essentially a set of attitudes, cognitions, value standards, and feelings towards the political system, its various roles and role incumbents. Critics recoiled at the idea of quantitative measurement of subjective dispositions. How do you measure a subjective attitude of authoritarianism, for example? In 1966, Daniel Elazar used the idea of political culture to analyze different regions of the United States and to compare them from one state to another. I read the book and I used it in my master's thesis. He comes up with a three-part typology of individualist political culture, which originated in the colonial period in the mid-Atlantic states, according to Elazar; traditionalist political culture, which originated in the southern states with the slave-owning culture; and the collectivist or moralist political culture, which originated in Puritan New England. And in his book, he traces these three different political cultures across the United States through immigration patterns. And it goes a long way to explaining the different political orientations today. You can almost map the the traditionalist political culture with the red states in the South, and the collectivist or moralist political culture with the blue states. Elazar admitted that his thesis was impressionistic. It resembled Ullman's in its emphasis on a particular pattern of orientation to political action in which each political system is embedded. In the 1970s, also saw a complaint emerge about the political culture literature contained in the normative bias that cultural symbols were shared deeply by all or most actors in a society, thus promoting stability and a conservative ideology. Another political scientist who studied political culture was Daniel Levine, who studied political culture in Latin America I read a number of his books for my dissertation, and he studied Catholicism, particularly Catholicism in Venezuela and Colombia. I highly recommend his books. Dittmer said the inability to specify political culture as either an independent or dependent variable was exactly the problem. So this is the part of the problem of precision and analysis of political culture. By the end of the 1980s, the political culture concept had undergone a vigorous revival. But this renaissance entailed no slackening of objections from critics. As the debate continued into the 1990s, scholars working with the concept were either looking for a causal middle ground, of which political culture could serve as an intermediate variable, or lobbying for an interrelationship between culture and structure. So an intermediate variable is the same thing as an intervening variable, which is a hypothetical variable used to explain links between the independent variable, which is the cause, and the dependent variable, which is the outcome. An example of this would be if you found someone dead in a car accident with a car full of beer cans. You could speculate or theorize that the beer cans caused the accident. However, there needs to be an intermediate variable, which is drinking the beer from the beer cans and becoming drunk. So you can't draw a straight line from beer cans to accident. Other scholars rejected this approach in favor of the primacy of institutions, political actors, or individuals' rational choice. By the way, rational choice has become a popular form of social theory for religious studies. If you're studying Brazil, it's Andrew Chestnut does quite a bit with rational choice. I'm trying to remember the guy who does it in U.S. religious studies, and I hate to say the name because I'm not exactly sure I'm remembering the right person. But rational choice basically comes down to microeconomics or the religious free market idea. So from 1989 to 1993, a group of successional scholars, Merleman, Gibbons, Wodowski, Lane, Nesbitt, Larkin, and Welch, acknowledged the ubiquity of the concept, but they lamented the inability to generate firm conclusions. I think my cigar is going out. In the 1990s, Robert Putnam wrote Making Democracy Work. It was a study of regional governments in Italy. I read that also when I was doing research for my master's thesis. In the 1996, Jackman and Miller, writing an issue of American Journal, and I lost my place. How did I do that? American Journal of Political Science questioned the notion of a renaissance, and they critically re-examined the work of Engelhardt and Putnam and reported that the cultural accounts of political life were substantially overstated. So as you can see, this idea of political culture is rather controversial. It's a lively debate about whether it can be used or not. I'm going to depart from the script here. You have the notes, you have the article that you can read yourself. So I'm just going to take my last few seconds to mention that one of the reasons why I studied Catholicism in Latin America was because I was interested in understanding political culture in Latin America, and my feeling was that 300 years of formation by Catholicism, of course there's many different kinds of Catholicism, would have a formative effect on the political culture of Latin America. And one of the things I'm headed to in this class is looking at how Pentecostalism, which is exploding in Latin America, might or might not alter political culture in Latin America. Good to be with you. Talk to you again next week. Take care.